"Open it, I am ordering you to open the gate, now." I heard the words through a wall of falling water, and for one breath I thought I had misheard them, because no man in his right mind would say them. But I had not misheard. The underwarden of the household, a tall, dry man named Selwyn Crail, stood on the slick stone of the gallery above the river gate with his cloak soaked black to the knee, and he was shouting them at my brother of the watch, Corporal Brant Farrow, who stood at the wheel of the great barrier with his hand laid flat across it like a man swearing on a stone. "I gave you a lawful order," Crail shouted. "Turn the wheel." Farrow did not turn the wheel. Farrow did not move at all. I will tell you now that I have served beside that man for 11 years, on the gate of Halmere and on the long, quiet posts of the inner courts, and in all that time I never once saw him afraid. I saw him afraid that night. I saw it in the set of his jaw and the white of his knuckles, and I understood it, because I was afraid too. The river had eaten the lower steps an hour before. It was coming up the wall, now a hand's width every few minutes, brown and fast and full of broken wood, and the only thing between that river and the streets of the lower town was the barrier, and the only thing standing between the barrier and a man who wanted it opened was my brother. Let me set it plain for you, so you understand what was being asked, because the cruelty of it is in the engineering and you cannot feel the night without it. Halmere sits where the river bends. Long ago the old kings built a stone embankment to hold the water off the palace stores and the granary that fed the whole city in a hard winter. And because a wall alone will burst when a wall alone is overtopped, the builders cut a relief gate into the embankment, a deep sluice with a barrier wheel, so that in a great flood the watch could open it and let the river spill where it would do least harm, east. The relief gate sent the water east, into the old fen and the drainage cuts where there were no houses. That was the design. Open the east relief, save the wall, and the river takes the empty fen and harms nothing. But the east relief had failed 2 winters back. The fen channel had silted up. The works to clear it had been argued over in council and not yet done. And so on the worst night in 40 years there was only one gate that would still turn, and it was not the east gate. It was the south sluice. And the south sluice did not empty into an empty fen. The south sluice emptied into the lower town. That was what Crail was ordering Farrow to open, not the relief gate as the builders meant it. A different gate, the only one that still worked, that would take the rising river off the palace embankment and the granary stores, and pour it straight down the narrow lanes of the lower town where the lamplighters lived, and the boatmen, and the women who sold fish at the morning stair and their children sleeping. 2,000 souls, maybe more, asleep behind doors that would not stop a foot of water, let alone a flood loosed on purpose. Open the south gate, and the palace stores were safe, and the lower town drowned. Hold the south gate, and the river kept rising against the wall, and the wall held or it did not, and the great stores took their chance with everyone else. That was the choice. And a frightened official in a soaked cloak had decided which way it should fall, and he had decided it should fall on the people who could not argue back. "The granary," Crail was shouting. "Do you understand what is in that granary? Do you understand what this city eats this winter if that store is lost? I am not asking you to like it, Corporal. I am asking you to obey a lawful order from the warden's office. Turn the wheel." I came up the gallery steps 2 at a time. My name is Aldous Wren, and that night I was a private of the River Watch, 4 years in, young enough that my hands still shook when great men shouted. I came up because I had heard the order from the lower walk and I did not believe it, and I came up to stand beside Farrow because that is what you do. You do not let a brother stand a thing like that alone. The rain was coming sideways. The lamps in their iron cages threw a wild swinging light, here and gone, so that Crail's face was a mask one moment and a man's face the next. "Corporal Farrow," I said. I do not know why I said his rank, maybe to remind us both what we were. "Stay back, Wren," he said, without turning his head. His voice was very level. That is the thing I remember most, how level it was with all the river roaring under us. Stay back and keep your feet. Don't touch the wheel. Tell your private to stand aside, Crail snapped at me, and help me turn it myself if this man has lost his nerve. He has not lost his nerve, sir, I said. The words came out before I weighed them. He's the only man on this wall who's kept it. Crail's head whipped round. For a moment I thought he would strike me. Then the river slammed a whole tree against the embankment below us, a sound like a door breaking off its hinges, and we all three felt the stone shudder under our boots, and Crail's face changed, and not toward sense, toward panic. I have learned since that there is a kind of frightened man who, the more the ground moves, the harder he reaches for the one lever he thinks he can still pull. Crail could not stop the river. He could not clear the silted fen. He could not unmake 2 winters of counsel delay. But he could make a corporal turn a wheel, or so he believed, and so the wheel became the whole world to him. You will both hang for this, he said, very quietly, which is worse than shouting. Mutiny in a state emergency. I will see it done. And Pharaoh, with his hand flat on the cold iron of the barrier, and the water climbing the wall behind him, said the line I have carried for the rest of my life. Then I will hang dry, sir, he said, before I drown a single child to keep the king's flower out of the wet. The lamp swung, light then dark then light. And in the light I saw that Crail had taken hold of the second spoke of the wheel with both hands, and that he meant, frightened and furious and out of every other answer, to turn it himself. Pharaoh's hand closed over Crail's wrist. Not a blow, not a fight. Just one gloved hand closed firm and certain, holding a man's wrist still against the spoke of a wheel that, turned, would empty a river onto the heads of the sleeping. Sir, Pharaoh said, take your hand off the king's gate. For a long moment nothing in the world moved but the water. Crail's hand stayed where it was, clamped to the spoke, and Pharaoh's glove stayed where it was, clamped to Crail's wrist, and the two of them stood frozen at the wheel like a single carving the rain was wearing down. I want you to understand that Pharaoh was not stronger than the underwarden in any way that mattered. Crail could have called for men. Crail carried the warden's seal. By every line of authority drawn on every chart in the household, the underwarden of stores outranked a corporal of the river watch by a mile, and on an ordinary day Pharaoh would have stepped back and saluted and let the man do as he pleased. But this was not an ordinary day, and the order was not an ordinary order, and Pharaoh had found the one place where the chart and the right thing ran in opposite directions. And he had chosen the right thing, and set his feet, and decided to be broken before he would be moved. You are mad, Crail said, but his voice had cracked in the middle of it. You are throwing the granary into the river over a feeling. No, sir. Pharaoh loosened his hand from Crail's wrist slowly, the way you let go of something you are not sure will stay put. Over arithmetic, flour can be carted in. We've done it before the year the harvest failed. There is a road and there are carts, and there is a granary at Westfold not 2 days off. There is no carting back a drowned street. You can replace what's in that store. You cannot replace what's asleep in those lanes. So we do not open the south gate. We hold and we send for the men who can clear the east cut, and we get the lower town out of their beds while there is still time to walk them up the hill on their own feet. That is the order I'll obey, sir. The one that adds up. I had never in 11 years heard Pharaoh say so many words at once. I think the size of the night had pulled them out of him. Crail stared at him, and I watched the man try 3 different faces: the warden's seal, the threat of the rope, the appeal to the flour, and watched each one bounce off Pharaoh like rain off the bearskin, and I saw the moment Crail understood that none of them would work, and that frightened him most of all. A man who cannot be threatened, and cannot be reasoned out of the right thing, is a terrifying object to a man who has already decided to do the wrong one. I'll find someone who will, Crail said. He let go of the wheel. I have men of my own. And he turned and went down the gallery into the dark and the rain, fast, his cloak streaming, toward the store's own people, the porters and the storemen, who answered to him and not to us, and who would turn a wheel if their warden told them to, because they were not standing where we were standing and could not see what we could see. "Wren," Pharaoh said the instant Krail was gone, "listen to me. He's right that he can find hands. There are 8 storemen in the granary, and they do what he says. If he brings them up here, we cannot fight 8 men and hold the wheel both. So we don't try. Then what? We make sure that by the time he gets back, the order isn't his to give." He turned and looked at me full on for the first time, and the lamp caught his eyes, and they were calm, dead calm, the calm of a man who has already paid the price in his own head and is only waiting for the bill. "There's a chain above him, Wren. There always is. He's the underwarden. Above him is the warden of stores, and above the warden is the lord of the household, and above all of them is the watch order itself, which says the river gate is the river watches to work and no one else's in a flood. He's reaching past the chain because he's panicked, so we reach up the chain faster than he can reach down it. You're going to run." "Run where? The lower bridge is under. The middle stair's a waterfall." "Not down, up. Up the inner stair to the household gallery, and you find the officer of the watch, Captain Marin. She'll be on the night roster, and you tell her in these words: 'The underwarden has ordered the south sluice opened. It will flood the lower town. The gate is held by the watch, and the watch requests the chain of command confirm the lawful order at once.' You say it just like that. You don't editorialize, you don't beg, you don't tell her it's wrong. You give her the facts in order, and you let her be the officer. She'll know what to do with them. Officers are for nights like this. And if Krail gets back before I do—" Pharaoh laid his hand flat on the wheel again and looked at the river coming up the wall. "Then I hold it alone until you do," he said. "Go, and Wren, keep your feet on the wet steps. If you go in the river, none of this matters." I went. I will not pretend I went bravely. I went with my heart in my mouth and the rain in my eyes, up the inner stair with one hand on the cold rope rail and the river roaring below me. And the whole way up I heard Pharaoh's voice in my head saying, "You don't editorialize. You let her be the officer." And I understood, even running, that he had just taught me the whole of how an honest man fights an order he cannot obey. You do not brawl with it. You do not run from it. You carry the truth up the ladder faster than the lie can climb down, and you trust that somewhere on that ladder there is a soul with the rank to make the right thing official, before the wrong thing becomes a fact you cannot undo. I did not know yet whether there was such a soul. I only knew Pharaoh believed there was, and that he was standing in the rain with his hand on a wheel, betting both our lives on it. The household gallery was a different world. Up there the storm was a sound at the windows, not a hand on your throat, and the long corridor was lit warm and steady, and there were clerks running with papers, and a smell of wet wool and lamp oil and fear held politely in check. I found Captain Marin at the map table at the gallery's end, a hard, square woman of 50 with gray at her temples and her tunic buttoned to the throat, though it was the dead middle of the night. And she had a chart of the river spread under her hands, and 3 junior officers around her, and she was the calmest person in the room by a distance. I came to attention so fast I nearly went over on the wet floor. "Captain, Private Wren, River Watch from the South Gate." And then I gave it to her exactly as Pharaoh had drilled me, in order, no more. "The underwarden of stores has ordered the south sluice opened. It will flood the lower town. The gate is held by the watch. The watch requests the chain of command confirm the lawful order at once." I watched her hear it. I watched it land. She did not gasp and she did not curse. She set down the divider she was holding very precisely, and she said, "Say the gate again. Which gate did he order open?" "The south sluice, ma'am. The east relief silted, it won't turn. South's the only one that works, and south empties into the lower lanes." She was quiet for exactly one breath. Then she turned to the nearest of her officers, and the calm came off her like a sheath off a blade. "Lieutenant Oak, the lower town is to be roused and walked up to the high market and the cathedral close. Now, every bell, every runner, every door. I want the boatmen stare, the fish stare, and the lamplane out of their beds inside the half hour. Go." The man went at a dead run. "Pell, find the warden of stores and the lord of the household, and have them in this gallery in 10 minutes, awake or not. Tell them the underwarden has ordered a populated district flooded to save the granary, and a corporal of the watch is holding the gate against him." Those words. The second officer went. Then Captain Marin looked at me, and for just a second the hardness in her face had something underneath it that I can only call respect. "Your corporal," she said. "He's holding the wheel." "Yes, ma'am. Crail's gone for the storeman. They'll turn it for him if he tells them to." "How many?" "8, ma'am, maybe more." She was already moving, pulling her cloak from the back of the chair. "Then we are going to be slower than I'd like, and we will go anyway. Wren, you'll take me down by the fastest way that isn't underwater, and on the way you'll tell me everything your corporal said, word for word, because if I have to stand on that wall and overrule an underwarden of the household in front of his own men, I want to do it with his exact reasons in my mouth and not my own. An officer who improvises on a wall like that gets people killed. Go." We went, and while we went, I learned this all afterward, pieced from Pharaoh and from the storemen themselves, who told it freely once it was over because they were ashamed and wanted to be honest. Crail had got back to the gate first. He came up the gallery with 6 of the granary men behind him, big men, porters' shoulders and lanterns, and he came up at a pace that said he had spent the whole climb working himself past the place where a man can still be talked to. Pharaoh heard them on the steps and did not take his hand off the wheel. "Corporal," Crail called out, "I'll give you one chance to step aside before these men move you. You will not be hurt if you step aside. Move now and I'll forget the wrist." Pharaoh looked at the 6 storemen coming up behind the underwarden, and he did the thing that I think of when I think of him, the thing that was braver than any blow. He did not square up to fight them. He spoke to them. "Tom Hale," he said, for he knew them, you understand. He'd stood that wall 4 years and shared a kettle with these men 100 mornings. "Tom Hale, your sister keeps the candle shop on the fish stair, doesn't she? Bottom of the lower town, right where this water's going. And Crew, your boy's apprentice to the boatwright on the boat stair. He's asleep down there right now. You came up here to turn a wheel that puts the river over both their heads to save a room full of sacks. I won't stop you with the rifle. I'm asking you to stop yourselves. Look at what your warden's actually telling you to do, and then put your hands on this wheel if you can." And the storemen stopped. Not all at once. Tom Hale stopped first, in the swinging lamplight with the rain running off the end of his nose, and you could see the order go out of his shoulders as the meaning of it went in. Then Crew. Then the rest. They stood there, 6 big frightened men with their lanterns, and not one of them put a hand on the wheel, because Pharaoh had not fought them. He had simply made them see the thing whole, and once a decent man sees a wrong whole he cannot unsee it and pretend he was only following the warden. "Turn it," Crail said. His voice had gone high. "Turn it, I order you. I am the underwarden of this household." "You're asking me to drown my sister, sir," Tom Hale said slowly, like a man waking up. "I don't think I will." That was when Captain Marin and I came up onto the gallery, soaked through, both of us breathing like horses, and the whole tableau turned to look at us. Crail white-faced at the wheel, the 6 storemen ranged uncertain behind him, Pharaoh with his gloves still flat on the iron, and the river roaring up the wall louder than it had been when I left, so much louder that I felt my stomach drop, because in the time it had taken me to run up and back the water had climbed nearly to the gallery itself. Captain Marin did not run the last steps, she walked them. I have thought about that since, that with the river that high and the night that wild, she made herself walk, because an officer who arrives at a panic by running only adds her own speed to the panic, and the one thing that wall needed was a person moving slow. She came to the center of the gallery and she put herself, deliberately, between the underwarden and the wheel. "Underwarden Crail," she said, "I am the officer of the watch. The river gate is the watch's to work by the standing order in any flood. You have no authority to open it and no authority to command these men to open it, and as of this moment I am relieving you of the attempt. Step back from the wheel." "You don't outrank me," Krail said. "I hold the warden's seal." "You hold the seal of the warden of stores," Marin said, "which gives you authority over Flower. It does not give you authority over the river or over a populated district of this city or over a sentry of the watch on his lawful post. You have reached past your own chain because you are frightened, and I understand that you are frightened, and it does not matter because the order is still unlawful and I will not let it be obeyed. I have sent for the warden himself and for the lord of the household. They are coming. When they arrive you may make your case to them and I will make mine, and whichever way they rule, this gate stays shut until they do. Now step back." And here is the thing about the chain of command that Pharaoh had bet our lives on, and that I did not fully understand until I watched it work. It is not magic, and it is not instant, and it does not always save you. What it does when it is healthy, when the people in it have not all rotted, is give a frightened man, at the bottom of it, a way to be right out loud and not be alone. Pharaoh holding the wheel by himself was one stubborn corporal against the seal of the household. The rope could have him. But Pharaoh holding the wheel with the officer of the watch standing between him and the underwarden, and the warden of stores, and the lord of the household on the stairs behind her. That was the institution itself coming down the ladder rung by rung to stand on the right side, and an underwarden could not fight all of that with a seal and a panic. But it had not all arrived yet, and the river was not going to wait for it. "Captain," it was Pharaoh, low and urgent, and we all heard the change in him because Pharaoh did not do urgent. "The wall, look at the wall." We looked. By the swing of the lamps you could see the embankment below the gallery, and you could see that the river had come up over the second course of stone, the old course, and where it crested it had found the seam, a dark mouth of water working at the mortar, the embankment beginning, very slightly, to weep through itself. It was not bursting, but it was speaking, and every riverman on that wall knew the language. A wall that weeps at the seam is a wall that has begun to lose and may have an hour and may have 10 minutes, and the river does not tell you which. Krail saw it too, and it broke whatever was left of him. "You see," he shrieked. "You see, it's going to give, and when it gives the granary goes anyway and the lower town goes with it for nothing. Open the south gate. Drop the level, save the wall, save what we can." "If you drop the level by opening the south gate," Marin said, without raising her voice, "you do not save the lower town. You drown it on purpose 10 minutes before the river might have drowned it by accident, and a flood you choose is a thing you will answer for in a way a flood you suffer is not. We do not get to murder the town to spare ourselves the grief of watching it flood. Those are not the same, underwarden, and the fact that you cannot tell them apart tonight is exactly why you are not to touch that wheel. I want to stop here a moment and tell you what it costs a man to hold a wheel while a wall begins to weep, because the stories make it look easy, and it is the hardest thing I know. Pharaoh had been right about everything, about the arithmetic, about the chain, about reaching up the ladder faster than Krail could reach down it. But being right does not make a wall stop weeping, and there is a voice in every man on a wall like that, a low and reasonable voice, and the voice was saying to Pharaoh, the way I know it was saying to me, "Open the gate, drop the level. The town's been roused, the bells are going, they're getting out, open the gate and at least save the wall, and if a few cellars in the lower lanes take water, well, water in a cellar is not water over a sleeping child, and you'd have a clean wall and a saved granary and nobody could call you wrong." That voice is the worst thing on the wall. It is worse than the river, because the river only wants to come in and the voice wants you to let it. It dresses the wrong thing up in caution and calls it the sensible middle. And the whole of Pharaoh's discipline that night, the part no one watching could see, was that he heard that voice and he did not turn the wheel a single degree toward it, because he had worked the arithmetic in the dry light of an ordinary day, and he was not going to rework it in the panic of a wet one. A man decides what he will not do before the night comes, he told me once. so that the knight does not get to decide it for him. That is the discipline. The standing still is only what it looks like from outside. Then what do we do? One of the storemen burst out, Crew, the one whose boy slept on the boat stair, and it was an honest question, a terrified honest question, and Marin turned to him and gave him an honest answer, which is the other thing a real officer is for. We do three things at once, she said, and we do them calm. 1. The lower town is already being walked up the hill. My lieutenant has the bells going, listen. And under the river faint, we all heard it then, the high bells of the lower wards ringing the rouse, the sound of 2,000 people being got out of their beds and onto the road in the dark. 2. We send for the engineers and the fascine carts to weight the seam, because a weeping wall can be held with stone and timber and weight, and there is a depot of it not a quarter mile up the embankment, and I am sending for it now. She did not even break stride. She pointed at me. Wren, the embankment depot, the engineer on night call, tell him weeping seam at the south gallery, bring everything. Run. I ran again. 3, she finished, behind me to the storemen. We hold the gate and we hold our nerve, because the wall has not given, and a wall that has not given can be saved. And the moment we open the south sluice we have thrown the dice for the lower town ourselves. And I will not let any man in the king's household do that while there is a single other thing left to try. And there was a single other thing left to try. There was the depot and the engineers and the carts of stone. The whole question of the night had just narrowed to a race, whether weight could reach the weeping seam before the seam became a breach. And Pharaoh's job and Marin's and the storeman's had become simply to hold the gate shut and the panic down long enough for that race to be run. The embankment depot was a low stone shed a quarter mile along the wall, and the engineer on night call was a wiry old man named Bressy who took one look at my face and was reaching for his coat before I'd finished the sentence. Weeping seam, he repeated. South gallery. How high's the crest over it? I told him. He swore once, briefly and without heat, the way a man swears at a job and not at God, and then he was shouting his own people awake and throwing open the cart shed. And inside it I saw what the night had been waiting for fascines, the great long bundles of bound brushwood the old engineers used to weight a failing wall, stacked to the roof, and beside them sledges of cut stone and chain and timber balks. 2 winters they argued about clearing the east cut, Bressy said grimly, harnessing the first cart, and not one of them argued about keeping this shed stocked, because filling a shed costs nothing and clearing a channel costs a fortune, and that, lad, is the whole story of how a city nearly drowns. Get on the back and hold the chain steady. We came back down the embankment with 3 carts in a line, the horses screaming at the water, Bressy and 4 of his men and me, and we came up to the south gallery to find it transformed. Marin had the storemen working. The same 6 men Crail had brought up to open the gate were now ranged along the weeping seam under Bressy's direction the instant he arrived, passing fascine's hand to hand down to the water line. And Tom Hale was up to his waist in the cold river holding a bundle against the seam while 2 men above him drove a balk to pin it, and Crew was beside him, and they were not storemen anymore. They were the wall, every one of them. And Pharaoh stood at the wheel through all of it and never once took his hand from the iron, because the gate was his post and the seam was not, and a man who knows the difference is worth 10 who don't. There was a moment, an hour into the work, when I thought we had lost it. A balk of timber that 3 men had driven to pin the largest bundle worked loose under the press of the water, and the seam opened again with a sound like the wall taking a breath, and a sheet of brown river came through and knocked Tom Hale clean off his feet into the dark below the gallery. For one horrible second nobody could see him. And in that second I watched Crail, slumped against the parapet where he had collapsed, lift his head and open his mouth, and I knew. He was going to cry out that this proved it, that the wall was lost, that the gate must be opened now. And I watched Captain Marin see the same thing, and instead of arguing with him she simply raised her own lantern high over the water and called Hale's name once, steady, a beacon and not a shout, and Bressy's 2 men had him by the collar and back onto the steps before Crail's words were fully out, coughing river but alive, and Marin said into the silence after, not to Crail but to all of us, "The wall is not lost. A man went in and a man came out. Drive the balk again." And we drove the balk again. That is what holding is. It is driving the balk again after the river has knocked it loose, as many times as the river knocks it loose, until the river is the one that tires first. It took the rest of the night. I will not pretend it was quick or that any one moment turned it. That is the lie stories tell, that there is always a single instant. The truth is that we weighted the seam bundle by bundle and stone by stone, and the river fought every bundle, and Bressy read the wall the way Pharaoh read the river, calling for weight here and timber there, and slowly, slowly, the dark weeping mouth in the mortar narrowed and stopped and held. The crest of the river touched its high mark an hour before dawn. Bressy marked it himself on the stone, a scratched line I have gone back to look at since, and it sat there, terrible and full, lapping at the lip of the gallery. And then, as the rain at last began to slacken upstream, it began, a hair at a time, to fall. The wall held, the gate stayed shut. The lower town, every soul of it, was up the hill in the high market and the cathedral close, wet and frightened and alive, and not one of them, not the candle seller on the fish stair, not the boatwright's apprentice asleep no longer, not one child, went into the water that night, because a corporal had kept his hand on a wheel. The warden of stores and the lord of the household arrived together a little before the crest fell. They had come down through the storm in their night cloaks, 2 of the highest men in the household, and they came onto that gallery to find the officer of the watch holding a wall, an under-warden collapsed and silent against the parapet, and a corporal at the wheel he had refused to turn. Marin made her report standing in the rain in order, no more, exactly as she had told me an officer must, and she made it with Pharaoh's reasons in her mouth, the arithmetic of it, the flour that could be carted and the street that could not be undrowned. And the lord of the household, an old man who had seen floods before, heard all of it, and then he did the thing that made the whole chain mean something. He did not thank Pharaoh privately and bury the matter. He turned to the under-warden and to the storeman and to every soul on that gallery, and he said it where all could hear. The corporal was right to refuse, and the order was unlawful, and any man who obeys an order to drown this city's people to save its property answers to me for it as if he had opened the gate with his own hand. The watch holds the river gate. That is the standing order, and after tonight it is the standing order twice over, written in this man's name. He looked at Pharaoh a long moment. "What is your name, corporal?" "Pharaoh, my lord." "Then the order is written in Pharaoh's name." And he turned to the warden of stores beside him and said, "Lower, but not so low we could not hear. And tomorrow you will find me the money to clear the east cut, the money that was always there and was always somewhere else, because I have just watched 2,000 people nearly die for the want of it, and I will not watch it twice." Crail was taken away quietly, not in irons. There is a kind of ruin worse than irons, and it had already happened to him in front of his own men. There was an inquiry, of course. I gave evidence, and Marin gave evidence, and the 6 storemen gave evidence, and it all said the same thing, because for once the truth had been done out loud in front of enough witnesses that no seal could bend it afterward. Crail never served the household again. He was not hanged, whatever he had screamed about hanging. The chain he had tried to misuse turned out in the end to be fairer to him than he had been willing to be to a sleeping town. That is the household's mercy, and I think it is the right one, but I will tell you honestly that the candle seller on the fish stair has a harder view of it, and I do not argue with her. They cleared the east cut that spring. I watched the first carts of silt come up out of the old fen channel, and I thought of Bressy saying that filling a shed costs nothing and clearing a channel costs a fortune, and I understood that the whole flood had been, underneath the water, an argument about which costs a city is willing to pay before the night comes, and which it puts off until the night decides for it. We had been lucky. We had been lucky that the shed was stocked, and lucky that the wall wept before it burst, and lucky most of all that the man at the wheel was Pharaoh and not someone who would have turned it, because a man with a seal told him to. Luck is a poor thing to build a city's safety on, but discipline is not luck. Discipline is the thing that stands where luck might not come and holds, so that luck has somewhere to arrive. Pharaoh went back to the gate. Of course he did. They offered him a sergeant's stripe and a posting up in the dry inner courts where the great men are, and he thanked them and asked to keep the river gate at Halmir, and they let him, because by then they had the sense to understand the kind of man they were dealing with. I asked him once, a quiet morning a year after with the river running low and brown and harmless under us, whether he had really been ready to hang that night, the way Krail had threatened. He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything. "I was ready to be wrong, Ren," he said. "That's the part nobody tells you. I was sure, but I wasn't certain. You understand the difference. Sure is what you feel. Certain is what you can prove, and I couldn't prove it yet, standing there with his hand on the wheel. I was holding a gate against a lawful seal on nothing but my own reading of the right thing, and if I'd read it wrong I'd have earned everything he promised me. The discipline isn't being certain. The discipline is doing the right thing while you're still afraid you might be wrong, and trusting the chain to sort it out once the truth's had time to climb the ladder. I held the gate. I let the captain be the captain. I let the truth do the convicting. That's the whole of the job. A man alone is just a stubborn man at a wheel. A man inside the order, holding the right thing until the order catches up to him. That's a watch. I have stood a great many posts since that night, and given a great many orders and refused a few, and I have never found a better way to say it than the way he said it that morning by the low brown river. The gate that would have drowned the town is shut to this day. The wall holds, and on the standing order of the River Watch of Halmir, in a hand that has long outlasted the man who wrote it, the South Sluice carries one line above the rest, where every new private learns it cold the day he takes the post. This gate is not open to save what can be replaced. It is held by the watch. Ask Pharaoh why.